I'm Don Tse, better known as the Don of Beer.
And I'm Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
Welcome to the 11th episode of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others like it. This week on the show, we're going to talk about craft malt. Our guests are Zach Gaines of Proximity Malt, a craft maltster headquartered in Wisconsin with malt houses in Colorado and Delaware, and Jason Perkins of Allagash Brewing, the famed brewery based in Portland, Maine. This is an episode I've wanted to do for a while. I think we are at the forefront of a big movement in craft malt. The way craft beer began cutting a new path decades ago, I think craft malt has the potential to change not only beer, but also agriculture. If you remember episode 1, when Kevin Davey of Wayfinder Beer told us that 2-row malt today behaves like 6-row malt, and that's what inspired him to make cold IPA. I think craft malt is changing the ingredients available to brewers and might inspire new beers and flavors like it did for Kevin.
I totally agree. There's new sustainable malt varieties being used by large brands like Dogfish Head to more hardy barley varieties being introduced and local artisanal production. Malt's a kind of unsung hero in beer. Let's not forget the adage that malt is the soul of the beer. So I'm really excited to talk with 2 excellent guests about all things malt.
It's going to change beer. It's going to be amazing.
It's going to do it.
All right, we'll introduce our guests and get into a conversation, but first we're going to take a moment to hear from our sponsors. And if you would like to help support this show, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com.
Hi, this is John Hall, the editor of All About Beer, inviting you to check out the Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast. It's available on all of the major platforms, and the weekly show features long-form conversations with brewers, growers, and personalities from the beer industry. New episodes release every Wednesday. Just search Drink Beer, Think Beer.
Zach Gaines works as the Director of Procurement for Proximity Malt, managing 2 different producer programs which supply barley to malt houses in Monte Vista, Colorado, and Laurel, Delaware. Prior to joining the Proximity team, he worked for a French-owned international plant breeding company called Limagrain, managing sales and marketing of wheat and barley varieties in the United States. Zach's first position out of college was with Anheuser-Busch InBev, where he held different roles in the barley breeding program before transitioning to the brewing side of the business for several years as a group manager in Los Angeles, California. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about craft malt and why it is important and different from what I'll call big malt, I guess.
Big malt, macro malt.
Macro malt. Well, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a really important one, just in terms of all the way down to the supply chain to the farm level. But I think, it starts with the inherent differences in craft beer and traditional domestic beer, or all malt beer versus adjunct style beer. And I think when you look at the malt bill or the grain bill for those 2 different products, that is kind of where the story starts. I think a fun way to think about it is that when you're brewing beer, there's kind of 2 different microscopic armies that go out and do work in different parts of the brewing process. And the first one is when you're actually converting starch from sugar, or starch to sugar. And then the second one is when you're converting that sugar to alcohol. And when you think about barley and kind of the first microscopic army, that's a microscopic army of enzymes, which I think about them almost like they're millions of little microscopic lumberjacks, and they go out and they chop up starch molecules and they turn them into sugar molecules. So if you think about, when someone mashes in a brew and it's in conversion, you've got barley in there, almost likely if you're a craft brewer and you're doing all malt, you've got nothing but barley in there. So almost 100% of your grist is going to be barley. Mm-hmm. Where with a adjunct style or a traditional domestic, maybe 60% or 50% of that grain bill is going to be barley, and the rest is going to be just a starch, maybe it's corn grits, maybe it's rice, and the barley brings the lumberjack army to the party. And really the adjunct doesn't. So whatever you put in that mash tun, the work needs to get done. And so if you think about, a traditional domestic beer, those lumberjacks need to pull more than their weight in terms of,
Right.
of making that conversion. Whereas in an all malt brew, it only has to pull its own weight, which goes down to the kind of the inherent difference in barley, because those enzymes come in each seed inside of in every barley kernel, it's bringing starch to that party, and it's also bringing the enzymes. So
Right.
that's kind of how I've always pictured it.
So what is kind of the negative of having, so for an all malt mash, what would be the problem with having too many lumberjacks?
Yeah. Well, with enzymes, if you think about what's inside of a barley seed, very simplistically, you can say there is starch in every seed and there is protein. And so the enzymes come from the protein portion of a seed. The higher the protein you have, or the higher the percentage of protein inside every barley kernel, the more enzymes you're going to have. Likely the more there's a positive correlation with free amino nitrogen as well. But more importantly, the less starch you're going to have. So, for every percent of starch you give up, which is a 1% gain in protein, you're really losing extract on the end. So, for a traditional domestic brewer, it's not unlikely to see 13% protein, because that will bring, the enzymatic package, or, brewers would refer to that as diastatic power, and it will have enough enzymes to get the job done, and enough free amino nitrogen to go through a lagering phase. But they are probably giving up a little extract. So if I'm a craft brewer and I'm thinking about every barley kernel that I'm getting, I'm thinking, man, if I don't need the fan and don't really want it, and I don't need quite so much enzymes, I sure would take a little bump in extract. Is kind of the way I view it.
So you were saying, like, for a barley that is made for an adjunct brewer, as much as 13% protein. By contrast, how much would be, like, in a proximity malt? How much protein would there be?
Yeah, we're going to be closer to 11%.
Oh, okay.
I think that, so there could be a 1%, 2% difference, and that would be for, like you said, an all malt grist.
Yeah.
But I would tell you that there are dangers in getting too low. You have to remember, the protein does bring, free amino nitrogen is a yeast nutrient, so it's necessary in all types of beer. And the enzymes are necessary. So I think if you were to get down under 9%, then I think you start messing with the quality, and the ability of your grist to actually get the conversion done on time. So, but to answer your question, yeah, we're going to be right around 11% as a target.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So, thank you for all that background on malt and enzymes and lumberjacks. Can you give us some background on proximity then, and what makes proximity different from mega malt, we'll call them?
Oh, I like mega malt. That's good.
Proximity, it's a really unique company, because it is not a craft maltster, by any measure, but like you said, it's not a behemoth, large maltster, and it's not associated with a single, brewing entity. But I think the hyper local focus was one of the reasons Proximity started. We have a malt plant in southern Colorado in the middle of the San Luis Valley, which is, there's some incredible barley growers, that are 5 miles from our malt house. And then the other one is in Laurel, Delaware, which is located in the middle of an emerging winter malting barley area, which is super cool, because you're taking an opportunity to to farms out there that didn't exist before proximity was there. But, with those two locations, we sell malt all over the US and to all different sizes of breweries. And we're able to, source from two different areas, but still achieve, a similar product in both locations. So, the thing that really attracted me to working with proximity is their size and the fact that they're not so big that you're turning a battleship if you want to do some progressive things in terms of raw materials, but you're also not so small that if you do something, it doesn't matter on a larger scale. So it's the perfect size to kind of lead change. And for me, that's of course is at the farm level, being that I work with our producers.
Right. So can you dive into that a little more, like in terms of your relationship with farmers? And my understanding is that you work with some different barley varieties, which allows you to work more directly with farmers, or those two concepts are somehow related.
Yeah, they are. They absolutely are. And yeah, I like to say that I work with two, Maine grower groups, and the wonderful thing is that they're all farmers, which is, I think if I can work my whole life and be able to interact with farmers, that will be, the biggest check on a bucket list for me. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. But we work, right now we work with between about 50 and 60 different farms in each area. And in Colorado, the San Luis Valley, based on where it's at geographically, it is cold in the winter, like not winter crop survivable cold, that's certainly not winter barley. So the varieties we use in Colorado are spring planted. So they're planted in March, harvested in August. And with our producer group in the Mid-Atlantic region, we have producers in Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And those are winter malting barley types. So those are planted in October, the month of October, some a little earlier, some a little later. Then those are harvested in June. So they overwinter. So it's part of the reason I'm able to manage both is that the seasons kind of offset,
right?
Because of the different types. But finding genetics that work on the farm is a big part of what I do, because there's a lot of new varieties coming out, both spring and winter types, and you can make step changes and improve profitability of the entire supply chain if you know what those genetics are and you can successfully put them on acres. So that's one of my favorite parts of the job, is I get to actually work one step before the farm portion of our supply chain with plant breeders to try and find the latest and greatest.
Okay, cool. So is it correct to say that the farmers that you're working with, just because of where they're geographically located and the climate, could not grow barley for the mega maltsters?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Possibly in Delaware. So, in the Mid-Atlantic region, that's a long ways away from some of the big maltsters. So that winter barley market is one that we're developing, and there are other craft maltsters out there who are doing the same thing that we are. But I think in that region, because of our size, we're actually the ones developing that market. And so I would say that your statement, Don, would be true in the Mid-Atlantic region.
Okay.
In Colorado, that Molson Coors, I don't know how much, but I know they contract some barley in Colorado. So we're another option for producers there.
Okay.
Is there a difference between spring and winter in terms of protein or growth, or would a brewer brewing a certain style want to use spring versus winter, or does it not really matter?
So it's a great question. And really it should not matter. I think that, what really it comes down to is whether it's a spring planted variety or a winter planted variety, does it have the right malting characteristics at the end of the day? Now, winter malting barley in comparison to spring barley cultivars is much newer. I mean, if you think about the amount of time people have been growing barley in Idaho, Montana, I mean, you got 100 years of development and breeding work into spring cultivars. So I think that, that the quality parameters are much more defined with spring cultivars versus winters. But the thing we have going, or kind of putting wind in the sails of winter malting barley, is that they are used in European countries. So it's not, while efforts to breed, domestically bred, from like American universities or breeding companies for winter are just now, that chain is kind of just now starting to catch, where we're seeing some good material. There's some very strong European cultivars that work over here. But to answer your question, and I would say that there should not be, but I think winter barley is starting to get there now, where it can compete at the same level in terms of extract, which is what's most important to everybody.
Great. So craft beer, depending on how you define it, and when you pin the beginning of the movement, is maybe 50 years old now. What has been the problem? Like, why is it so hard to make change in the malt industry?
Yeah, and that is I mean, this is a can of worms for sure, but I can tell you that a plant breeder they have a really hard job, because they serve three masters in terms of a brewing supply chain. They need to release a variety that works well on a farm. So if I'm a farmer, I need it to yield a little bit more than my old option, because I know the old option and I know how to grow it. So, what's my opportunity cost for changing and taking on a new line? And if I'm a maltster, I'm thinking, well, I know how the varieties that I'm using, I know how they work. I know what their hydration times are. I can dial in my extract. And then, anybody who's ever worked at a brewery, I mean, having to redial in an entire brew house and fermentation department around crop year changes, things that maybe are even the same varieties. I mean, not only is it a pain, but it costs money. So it's an industry that is built to run with consistency. And by introducing a new variety, you're disrupting that in some way, even though the whole, new genetics provide an opportunity for people to make more money. So it's, it's that level of change that is hard. So when you're introducing new varieties, you really have to convince three people, but I would argue that it's the job of the maltster to really take the lead and taking on new genetics.
Okay, cool.
So is it for spearheading new initiatives for like genetics and whatnot? Is that big malting or universities, or who's creating these new cultivars? Like I'm really fascinated by it, because it reminds me, I think, a lot of hop production, but maybe it's not.
No, I would say that it is. I mean, I think that it's a longer process to bring on a new small grain, barley or wheat, than it would be, in hops, just in terms of the investment and the time that it takes. But I mean, right now I think there's 23 to 25 different universities in the US who breed for small grains, and I would say all of those have wheat breeding programs on some level, or wheat trialing programs. And then a subset of those are also working on barley. Oregon State University, University of Idaho, Montana State University, North Dakota State, University of Minnesota, Cornell, Michigan State, Virginia Tech, I think maybe even University of Maryland and North Carolina State. So those are public institutions that are actively breeding and trying to find new cultivars. And then you also have, larger breeding companies, and a lot of those are kind of multinational. I mean, I used to work for a French-owned company called Lima Grain, and they had 3 different programs in Europe. You have companies like KWS, which is a German company. So there's a lot of people. At the end of the day, there are a lot of new varieties coming. These are all pipelines, and it's kind of like where you run into the problem is they're like, hey, we've got something, we think it's better. Brewing industry, could you take a look at this? Could you find ways, if it feels like it fits, how do we actually get this out on acres? And that is where it gets hard.
Right. Because the farmers won't plant it unless they have a buyer, and the only buyers is the malt houses, and the malt houses will only buy it if they have a buyer, and the only buyers are breweries. So
yeah, absolutely. That is exactly how it is. And it takes a whole supply chain to want that change to happen. And again, there are a lot of reasons why that's a challenge,
right.
but it still happens. And back to a point you made earlier, there was a time when there were not craft specific varieties where Anheuser-Busch has a breeding program, Molson Coors has a breeding program. So I mean they're going to breed barley varieties for their styles of beer. And I think that there was a portion of time where craft brewers were essentially using varieties that were bred for adjunct style beer. So I think just the fact that craft beer now has such a huge presence, and they, per barrel, they use, 2 to 3 times as much barley as a traditional domestic brewer. They now have a voice. So you're starting to see varieties that are suited specifically for craft and benefit craft brewers begin to get out on bigger acres.
Is there anything in the pipeline that's coming down that you're like, hell yes, let's,
Yes. There's a lot of things that are actually, that's, part of my role with proximity is to look at that, to look at those new varieties and do research. And, at our plant in Colorado, we're fortunate to have Colorado State University research extension down there, and the bulk of the work they do is on potatoes, but they're able to do small grains work. So we had a trial with them, and we looked at 14 new varieties along with some of the ones we use now. And I mean, there's some stuff that just blew my mind in terms of the top end yield potential.
That's exciting.
And then and the same thing in the Mid-Atlantic. I think a breeding cycle, and that's from a time when a plant breeder makes a new cross. So you've got something brand new, they put a mom and a dad together, and you have hopefully something that's better. From that time until you actually have enough seed where you can put it in the field or on a few acres to really kind of kick the tires at the farm level, it's going to be anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And I think AMBA, the American Malting Barley Association, they put a lot of effort and resources into kind of bolstering development of new cultivars, and a lot of that's been in the winter barley. So we're just kind of now starting to see the fruit, specifically from Virginia Tech. I mean, we're going to be helping them launch a new variety called Avalon that is an American bred new winter 2-row barley, and I think it's going to be an instant improvement in extract, versus what's currently available. So stuff like that is really exciting because these varieties exist and they can literally save money for an entire supply chain. You just have to know where to find them.
Right. We sort of glossed over it. Can you just, in terms of size, talk about how big like the mega maltsters are versus how big proximity is versus how big, the smallest malt house might be?
Yeah, I mean, the smallest, I think craft maltsters, and they're of all sizes. And one, I just want to say that I think they provide, craft maltsters provide a huge value to the industry because they are hyper local. There are beers I know. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and there's a couple of really cool craft maltsters here. And I know I've drank beer on tap in town that the barley has traveled from the field to their malt house to a tap less than like 6 miles. So,
wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
being able to do something like that is amazing.
Yeah.
But I think, the smallest people, I mean, they might be able to contract, 100 or 200 acres of barley, with an average yield of, around 100 bushel per acre, and that might be what they do for a year. And
Okay.
the biggest monsters, you're talking about, if you think about the amount of malt that Anheuser-Busch would need, they have 12 domestic breweries that, probably brew between 8 and 14 million barrels a year each. So, that is a huge amount of barley and amount of malt needed for that. And I'd say, proximity, we're in the middle between the craft monsters, and, we're, very small compared to the likes of someone like Molson Coors or Anheuser-Busch, but, we're much bigger than what you would consider a traditional craft monster, if that kind of answers it.
Right.
I'd say we're the perfect size to be progressive is kind of how
We're running short on time. I did want to ask, for the average beer drinker, if you could sum up for the average beer drinker why they should care about craft malt and what they can do to help support craft malt.
Yeah,
Can you
I would
speak to that?
say absolutely. I think if the average beer drinker cares about, the agricultural farm communities where their ingredients come from for their beer, then they can absolutely do something about it. And I think that's as simple as, if you have a favorite brewery or a few breweries, just asking the question, hey, where do you source your malt? And is there anybody local? A lot of breweries are trying, they're trying to ascertain the value of, because, craft malt, and I would exclude proximity for this, but craft malt is likely going to be more expensive, in terms of just, price per weight than a larger malting company. So craft brewers are looking for the value there. Why should we spend this money? And if customers care and they care about local, and they care that their malting, that their brewer is using malt that is bred specifically for craft beer and adjunct style of beer, just making that known can honestly make a difference. And that message can travel all the way down to the farm level. So I think just showing they care and asking questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Em, did you have any other questions?
I guess my last question would be like, what's the future of malt? Like, what do you see coming down the pipeline? We already talked about that, but is there anything you wish would happen, or do you see where do you see proximity going?
But I think the proximity, so I answer the first question first. I feel like hopefully the future is recognizing the value in supply chains beginning to get closer together, because I think there's a pile of breweries in the US on the Atlantic coast, and the nearest, large maltster to them is, likely east of or west of the Mississippi River. So, as brewers begin to value having ingredients that are closer, and there's cost benefits, in terms of logistics as well, I think that'll provide more opportunities for companies like Proximity who are willing to open up new areas where barley can be grown and kind of expand the presence of craft barley and the brewing industry. And for Proximity, I feel like we have a success story that's happening in the Mid-Atlantic region with winter malting barley. And I think that it's going to be a proof of concept that can happen, that there can be new opportunities at the farm level, that brewers and distillers can be closer to their ingredients, but they need to support people willing to open up these new markets.
Awesome.
Very cool stuff.
Yeah. Zach, if people want to learn more about Proximity and what Proximity is up to, where can people find you?
Yeah, they can call me. I love talking to people in the industry. And I'll give you my phone number. It's 970-402-2934. But my email address is just zach.g@proximitymalt.com. And you can go to our website as well. So I appreciate you all making some time to hear about what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you both.
Jason Perkins is the brewmaster and vice president of brewing operations, encompassing the departments of warehouse supply chain, production, packaging, and quality at Allagash. Jason has been a part of Allagash since 1999. He currently sits on the board of the Brewers Association, American Malt and Barley Association, and Allagash Wilderness Waterway Foundation, and is actively involved with the Hop Quality Group. He's the chair of the Brewers Association's Technical Committee, a former board member of the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, New England, as well as the Maine Brewers Guild, and is the recipient of the 2016 Russell Shearer Award for Innovation in Craft Brewing. When Jason is not working, he enjoys hanging with his family, exploring the many beautiful wild places in Maine, and playing ice hockey. He lives in North Yarmouth with his wife, Julie, and 2 children. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time. I think most beer drinkers, or certainly a lot of beer drinkers, are familiar with Allagash and your award-winning beers. But we want to talk to you about malt, and I know that Allagash does some interesting things in terms of malt procurement. And so I guess the first question would be if you could kind of describe that process and maybe how that process maybe has changed over the last few years.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Yeah, I mean, it's changed dramatically how, the grain and malted barley we're purchasing here has changed dramatically in the last, 10 years, I'll say for sure.
Okay.
And, directionally also, or not directionally, but volume wise has changed also the last couple of years. So, going back 10 years ago, we were buying almost no raw materials from the state of Maine other than fruit. So we were buying, fresh fruit for our wild and funky beers from some small farmers, but that's kind of it. We weren't really buying hops. We weren't really buying grain. There were no malting malt houses in the state back then. And that was a little bit of a driver, but I'll also admit that there's a little bit of kind of, I guess ignorance is even the right word about the history of small grain growing in the state of Maine. So this is like 10 years ago. Just not necessarily understanding the years of history of growing barley, oats, wheat in this state. And once we kind of got wind of that and started understanding a little bit more, talking to farmers, talking to people from organizations like the Maine Grain Alliance here in the state, it really kind of was totally eye-opening. And from there, really, slowly / at a higher rate, changed our approach to purchasing small grains from the state.
Yep. So today, how much of your grain would be grown in Maine?
So we let's see. This year we'll probably do about 1.4 million pounds of grain grown in the state. Back in 2016, when we started down this road of basically, to back up, in 2016 we said, kind of made an internal pledge and then expanded that pledge to our farmer partners that we would purchase 1 million pounds per year of grain grown and processed in the state. And in 2016, when we made that decision, we were doing about 60,000 pounds a year. So just a tremendous increase in that time frame of how much we were making or how much we were using.
And so now, is that all of your malt, or is that half?
No, we're still buying. I mean, we're still buying a fair bit of malt. It's not all domestic. We buy some specialty stuff from across the pond, from Germany and Belgium, but that's really for very specific specialty recipes, stuff like that.
Okay.
We're still buying a decent portion of grain from Breeze Malting, actually, out in Wisconsin, who's been a long time supplier of ours. So,
okay.
we're a pretty good sized brewery, right? So I actually, the infrastructure is not even if we wanted to buy 100% of our grain from the state, we actually probably couldn't. I'm not 100% sure that's the case. But when we made that pledge in, to by 2021 to be using 1 million pounds of grain, and because we were using so little, these farms are also small. The malt houses were small. The intention of that pledge was, okay, it's going to take time for these malt houses and farmers to grow their business. It's going to take time for us to implement these grains into our beer. I mean, Allagash White's our flagship. We've been making it for a long time, and it's not like we're going to just switch overnight to getting ingredients from a different place. So we needed that time to play around with it, make sure the quality is where we needed to be, make sure those farms could grow their processes and so on. And if I'm being honest, cost is a big part. Buying grain from a small producer costs more money, and as it should. There are smaller outfits, the economies of scale aren't there, et cetera. So, if we were to just switch overnight to buying 100% of our grain, it would be pretty difficult financially. So all of those things kind of led us to let's grow this over time for our best interest, but also the farm and maltster's best interest as well.
So you brought up Allagash White. Are you kind of slowly increasing the amount of local grains in it to try and slowly shift the recipe, or are you trying to maintain the flavor identical and therefore having to tweak because of the different ingredient source?
Yeah, we are certainly trying to maintain the flavor of that beer for sure. I mean, that beer recipe effectively has not changed since Rob Todd first wrote the recipe back in 1995. Now, we're brewers we're using agricultural ingredients. We have lots of tools in our toolbox as brewers to make process changes. So it's not like exactly the same ingredients are in that beer anymore because, crops change and availability changes and so on. But the intention is still at the end for that beer to taste the same way it always has. But again, we've got tools in our toolbox to on our process side. We also have specifications that we can ask of the malt houses. We can say, this is the barley of grain that you grow. It works for you agronomically, but we need you to hit these specifications for, all, alpha amylase, diastatic power, extract, protein, et cetera, all those things. And they have their own tools in their toolbox to hit those. Right. So that's where we can do both. We can use more grain and still maintain that same flavor. To answer your question more directly, we are continually increasing the portion of Maine grown grains in white every year. And some of that is with base malt, with malted barley. And but also white is made is a wheat beer, of course, and also uses a good portion of oats. So there's a high portion of locally grown wheat and oats in every batch of Allagash White, and that's continuing to increase every year as well.
Right. Okay. You sort of hinted at it, like you referred to your farming partners. I was wondering if you could kind of describe how 2016 you make this pledge. What had to happen with farming partners, with malt houses, with even trucking or whatever to bring us to today, and then bring us to tomorrow as well.
Sure. Yeah. Lots of things for sure. And again, back to that way we made that pledge was, you can count on us. We can't tell you exactly how much we're going to increase it every year, but you can count on in 5 years from now, we're going to be purchasing this much, and use that to help guide, best, like where to source your barley, where to, how to expand your malt house. So we work with two primary malt house partners in the state. There's two in the state. We work closely with both of them, Maine Malt House in Mapleton and Blue Ox in Lisbon Falls. They're each a little bit of a different model. Blue Ox has partnerships with several farms, and they purchase barley to their needs. Whereas Maine Malt House also owns their own fields and grows their own barley. So they were like a farmer and a malt house in one. So each company has done different things, but both of them have expanded pretty substantially in terms of acreage they're farming, malt house capacity, storage capacity. And, I am not going to pretend that's exclusively because of Allagash. There's also been just a continual increase in local malt purchasing in our state by maybe not every brewery in the state, but many of them. We're certainly by no means the only craft brewer in Maine who is buying a ton of grain from these local folks. So it's us, but it's also just a movement towards purchasing more locally and recognizing that the quality's there, the carbon footprint is substantially lower, the supporting of jobs and expanded acreage is all just a kind of just honestly just a win-win all around story.
Right. Is it fair to you kind of hinted at that historically grains were grown in Maine, maybe that kind of went away, and so in terms of the farmers, how they wouldn't have had the equipment or whatever to grow. So are you reviving communities? Is that overselling it, or I think this is super cool. So
I don't think it's totally overselling.
Yeah.
I think, and again, not just Allagash, but we play a part in it for sure.
Yeah.
And I think as the biggest brewer in the state, our platform, our ability to talk about it, whether it's on social media or even things like this, help raise the awareness. So I think that is as important as the actual purchasing itself, just raising awareness that this is a great thing to do.
You do that do you still make 16 counties?
We do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And 16 counties was the first we released that at the same time in 2016. And that was a beer built around local malt. So, not to go down the rabbit hole of beer development on this podcast, but, typically most beers that we make are created from a, concept first, flavor profile first. Okay, then let's go source the ingredients to reach said flavor profile. In 16 counties, we almost turned that backwards and said, these are the farms we want to support. These are the things they grow. Okay, let's take and build a recipe that highlights those ingredients and those flavors. And so that beer is 100% Maine grown grains. And we still make that. We predominantly sell that just here in the state. But we still make it, and it's still a fan favorite here.
It's delicious. Yeah. Definitely something I reach for when I visit Maine. So
good to hear.
Can you give us a little insight into, I think that the average consumer thinks of malt as kind of, as a commodity, which I guess, in many respects it is. And so, okay, well, you're, instead of buying malt from maltster A, you're buying malt from maltster B, and that's it. But really there are differences, you were talking about diastatic power and, beta glucanase and all that sort of stuff. So how, I guess I'm asking you to explain to our listeners how much effort, because I want people to admire how much effort you are putting into this. How much effort does it take to substitute grain?
Yeah, no, I'll first say that if a consumer who drinks beer thinks about malted barley as a commodity, in a weird way, I almost already see that as a win, because I feel like there's so many people out there who think that beer is made from water, yeast, and hops, and they kind of forget about the grain just because hops are so elevated to so many consumers about what they contribute, and I think sometimes malt gets forgotten. So that's step one, is just before you even get to talking about it being locally grown, just, hey man, beer is made with barley, remember? But for sure, there's, just like in hops, there are a whole bunch of varieties out there. There are different types of barley that's grown, and then different areas, just like a Cascade hop grown in Washington State or Oregon is going to smell and taste different than one grown in Michigan. It's the same with barley. So you have barley varieties that have different agronomic properties, but also flavor and aroma properties. And then where it's grown is going to factor into that as well. And then, of course, the malting process adds its own little wrinkles to it as well. But we have been big in terms of varieties. Because these farmers are small and they're making their living on them, we we don't stay totally hands-on off on the variety they choose, but we do say, look, you need to choose the variety that works best for you in terms of, yield per acre, disease resistance, like those things that are so critical to their bottom line. That's kind of the guidance we've been giving them, but we've also said, look, as much as you can keep us informed about the varieties you're hoping to grow. And so traditionally it's been mostly one variety here in the state called Newdale. But there are several new varieties that are being grown in the state by a couple of the farms, and they've been slowly phasing them in. And we'll get, small amounts of some of these newer varieties of barley that are grown and malted, and we'll brew on our little pilot system and just make sure this isn't, going to produce an overly different flavor profile or any fermentation concerns and so on. So that's just a little bit of a window on some of the work we're doing there.
Right. I think a lot of the last several decades, malt growing and barley breeding has been focused on extract and extract efficiency, diastatic power. Are you seeing any movement towards either barley breeding or malting for more of a flavor, where flavor is more of a driver? And what I'm thinking about is, in the UK, for example, Maris Otter is lauded for its unique flavor, but we don't really talk about that in North America with our barley varieties.
No, it's a great question. And I do, to answer quickly, say, I do think there is a slow movement in that direction amongst the craft malting community. You're right that barley varieties, the type of barley varieties that a farmer would grow, have historically been almost 100% dictated by Anheuser-Busch and the big brewers. They're a little bit less involved, honestly, now that they're not owned by the Busch family, but there's still, there's a certain standard they want. They want extract and they want yield. They want low price. They probably want high enzyme package too, because it's those grains are used to make adjunct lagers. But we didn't really have even a lexicon to talk about it. And some of the work that Craft Malting Guild has done on flavor and on evaluating barley flavor and through the hot steep method and some of those things have really, I think, slowly pushing the direction towards beyond just what analytical measurements are on a certificate of analysis sheet. Let's also talk about the flavors that these grains provide. And that's really relatively new. I think the hot steep technique's only, I don't know, six or 7 years old, maybe. Maybe 8. I can't remember exactly, but it's not that old. So just even that, having even a lexicon of flavors to use and a method for evaluation is relatively new.
Is there anything you're excited about in the malting that Blue Ox or Maine Malt House are doing that you're like waiting for in a couple of years, like rubbing your hands together, like getting ready for new recipes or new barley varietals?
Yeah, there is that Newdale variety I referenced is kind of being slowly sunsetted because of a long story of copyrights and royalties and some of the stuff that happens in the seed side of things. But there are several new varieties that are being introduced in the state that'll give us a little bit more diversity of options, which is kind of cool. Again, almost exclusively one variety grown in the state for a while, even before the malt houses have been opened. Because I should mention that before Blue Ox and Maine Malt House opened, there was barley, malting grade barley being grown in northern Maine, but it was all going to Canada to get blended into large batches. And most of that was, the varietal selection was being developed by either Anheuser-Busch or Canada Malting Company. And so farmers in Maine have actually been growing malting grade barley for quite some time. It's only in the last 10 years that these two malt houses have come online and kind of expanded the type of malting that's happening up there. But yeah, I'm excited for a couple new varieties that are coming, going to be planted in the next couple of years.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I've seen last time I was visiting, I knew that your commitment to local malt because you had a huge super sack bag of Blue Ox, which means that you're really taking the local malt, and that's a big ass bag. So you were taking it really seriously, and it was really cool to see. Plus 16 counties and all the other things that you do for the Maine economy is always a joy. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, working with these farmer partners is, honestly one of the most rewarding and most fun things that I personally get to do here. Yeah. We always make sure to make at least one visit a year up. It's still a 4 to 5 hour drive for us.
That was my next question. Because Maine, Maine is
far north.
Maine is so much bigger than everyone. You don't realize how huge it is. Until you visit, and then you're like, oh wait, there's like most of the state that's just there. So it's really beautiful country up there. It's Aroostook County is where most of this and which is the northernmost county and referred to kind of colloquial here as the county, because it's I think it's the biggest county east of the Mississippi or something like that. Wow.
So it's a large area, not a lot of people, but a lot of farming and really beautiful area up there. So that's where almost all of the small grain growth is happening.
Very cool.
So just to kind of wrap up, why should beer drinkers, like obviously supporting local is something people want to do. Anything else that beer drinkers should be looking for with their local beers or in an Allagash beer? Should they be looking for flavors? Should they be talking to their brewers about supporting local? Like what can beer drinkers do?
Yeah, I think, I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but, if for beer drinkers who are at, their local tap room, their local brewery, when they're at the bar, ask like, where did your grain come from? What kind of grains do you use in this? Because again, it's not a question that is as commonly asked as, oh, what's the latest new hop you're using? So just simply engaging and asking the breweries, like, where is this grain coming from? Because supporting local is a big part of it. Supporting small farms, it's a huge buying your grain from a local producer versus someone that's 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 miles away is a huge sustainability improvement. So there's just lots of good stories to be told around supporting, the closest barley, wheat, oats grower that's to you.
You know what I'm going to do is next time I'm at Allagash, I'm going to order a beer and I'm going to say, oh, this tastes like Newdale barley.
Yeah.
I like that.
You really get the Newdale.
Yeah.
I like that.
So much better than Old Dale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to anything else you'd like to tell us about Allagash and cool things going on?
Things are going well here. We just recently opened up a new kind of addition to our tasting room experience on site that we're calling the Cellars. So it's basically like a small, very hands-on tour and tasting, mostly focused on our wild and funky beers, that is located in the original kind of brewery that we started in, just right on site. And so that's open several days a week and is kind of a cool way to see kind of into the, wild and funky and real specialty beers that we're making over there. So that just opened about just a couple of weeks ago. That's the latest new exciting thing we got going here.
Awesome. Do you want to shout out your socials for people to follow or website?
So I'm not the big social guy, but You can find us on all the social things, at Allagash Beer. So easy to find, but
awesome.
It's not necessarily my thing, but
Em, did you have any last questions?
No, I'm just, every time we talk about malt, it's just so fascinating because I do think it's an afterthought in a lot of casual beer drinkers. And I don't think they realize how it's the soul. I mean, that's what the adage, it's the soul of the beer. And it really is incredibly important. It's so cool to learn the backstory of where it comes from, especially seeing people use local malt is awesome. I'm very pleased.
Yeah, agreed. And I appreciate you guys, bringing this up as a topic. As you can tell, it's something I feel pretty strongly about and passionate about. So I appreciate you letting me talk about it.
Wonderful.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for your time, Jason.
Yeah.
Thank you so
take care.
much.
Cheers.
All right. See ya.
So how cool is that?
Oh my gosh, you're so excited right now, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I love this stuff. And we didn't even touch on, we could have a whole separate podcast just on
Part
malt,
2,
'cause
part
that's
3, part 4, part 5, I feel like
No,
we're
I
gonna
mean
have
like a whole show,
the malt show.
yes, the malt show. Let's do the malt show.
All right, we're gonna we should ask All About Beer if we can start a new podcast strictly on malt, and they're gonna be like, what?
And it was so interesting to hear about the seedy business that is malt.
Boo. I mean, yay.
Okay, well, visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer, and visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others. If you have questions for the experts, email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. So, Em, if people want to follow you, where can they reach you?
They can reach me at Pints and Panels, which is across all social media platforms, or www.pintsandpanels.com is my website. What about you, Don?
I am at the Dawn of Beer across all social media channels. People can email me at dawn@thedawnofbeer.com. And please do, because I love talking about beer. Reach
And
out,
malt.
please. And malt. Yes,
And,
send me all your malt questions. This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers.
Cheers.